everyone, welcome to another episode of Follow Up. My name is James, and this morning I'm here with Scott Beckenhauer, our lead pastor. And Scott shared the word with us yesterday, and we were in this new series called Strong and Courageous. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit about what this series is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being strong and courageous, James.
Nailed it. And moving on.
And moving on. No, it's going to be about the book of Joshua. Mm-hmm. So it's the sixth book of the Bible. And really, I think with things that everybody faces in their life, there are seasons, there are moments that just require strength and courage. And we may know that, but we may not know how to move forward in that.
Yeah.
And it's like you might feel stuck or frozen, or just fear might be paralyzing you. And so we really thought going into this summer, especially coming out of this COVID season, and there's new opportunities, new horizons that everybody might be trying to figure out what is next. We just thought this might be a great time to tackle that this summer.
Yeah. And so we're kind of going to be here the next couple of weeks in the book of Joshua. And it's such an interesting story because he's coming on the heels of Moses and the incredible leadership that Moses had, and just like kind of that, it's a big shoes to fill. And he's kind of entering into the season where it's like, hey, also you kind of have to hit the ground running, and you kind of need to like lead this people to kind of go do this, like something pretty big right now. And so it's kind of a big weight to carry. And so I'm going to read a little bit of where we were. So starting in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. So this is just kind of how this book starts. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So this is kind of the passing of the torch, kind of like the calling you to be something more than yourself, and kind of calling him to be this great leader. And so what do you see in this? What's some of the things that you take away when you read a passage like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a visual learner, and so I'd always love to visualize what's actually happening in this moment. Moses is gone, as you noted. There is this passing of the torch of leadership where God's like, okay, Joshua, who had been there along Moses' side as his aide, it says, is now being tasked with leading, they believe, roughly around 2 million, some people will say up to 3 million people across this river, which we'll get into that story this next week, but then go into this land. And so visually, just to conceptualize what's happening, in this huge moment of saying, go forward. And then 3 times, you just read through it, James, 3 times, the Lord uses these words, be strong and courageous, then be strong and very courageous. And then again in verse 9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. So it's like, there's a message the Lord's trying to get through to him.
Yeah.
Almost like the Lord knows, Joshua, this is not going to be easy in your flesh. You may have been confident before in things, but he knows he's going to be facing moments, days, this season of life in front of him where it's going to be required of having an unusual amount of strength and an unusual amount of courage. And then he says, don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, for I'm going to be with you wherever I go.
Yeah.
So that really jumps out to me.
Yeah, I really like this. I think one thing we don't really talk about in the story of Joshua is God's probably saying it a lot because he knows he's feeling it. Yeah. He's probably feeling the weight of like, I thought Moses was supposed to take us into the promised land. Like he'd been leading us for a long time, and it was like, that was the plan. And now Moses is gone, and now it's me. Yep. And so he's probably feeling the weight. And it's not that he's just going into this unoccupied land. We'll talk about it later. But this is like also a land that's been occupied by people that are much stronger than them. And it's just kind of the idea of like, am I ready to do this? And so I think God is speaking also directly to him and kind of encouraging him like, hey, I'm going to be with you. The same way I was with Moses, I'm here with you now. Yep. And like, you can be strong and courageous. He's probably speaking that to him and speaking that word into his life because he knows he's probably not feeling very strong and courageous as he's kind of like taking on this mantle of leadership and kind of like doing this. But we talked a lot about how God will put us in the places of risk so we can trust, encourage him. And we also talked about really at the heart of it, courage is taking the next step of faith in spite of your fear. Yeah. So can you unpack that a little more about what courage really looks like in our life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, looking at even the way Joshua, it's easy to hang on to those words, be strong and courageous, like through the passage we just looked. But when I really began looking at it a little more intently, a little more carefully, you see what he says in verse 7. He's like, be strong and courageous. And then he says, be careful to obey. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about the book of the law that my servant Moses gave you. Don't turn from it to the right or left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep the book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night so that you'll be careful to do everything in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful.
Yeah.
And as I noted yesterday within the message time, we talked about this idea of Israel's history. They knew what it was to like disobey. Mm-hmm. So they had just been brought out of slavery. Yep. They began grumbling and complaining against Moses, which was really grumbling and complaining like what God was telling Moses to do and where to lead them. Mm-hmm. And then that led them to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that sounds like a harsh lesson.
That sounds horrible.
It sounds awful.
That's a lifetime for it. That's a generation. That's
an entire generation, maybe even two, depending on, where they were at in their family cycle. And it was like, hey, like obey, like obedience directly results in blessing in God's eyes, So he said, hey, obey. And so when we talk about this next step of faith, and that's why it's not just the next step, because you and I might define our own next step. Mm-hmm. My next step is to make this kind of a plan for my life, or to buy this next thing, or to do this next thing. But like the next step of faith is always related to my relationship with God. And I think that's what courage really is. What is that next step of faith that I need to take where I say, God, I know you're here. God, I want to bless you. I'm going to be obedient to you in this part of my life. Mm-hmm. So James, you might be facing challenges in your life.
Yeah. So even as I was like thinking of this, like courage is taking the next step of faith in spite of your fear, or even like I think of like in spite of my current circumstances. Yep. Right. So this weekend, I just mentioned to you, like my car broke down in Norfolk. So I'm 2 hours away. I have my 5 and 6 year old niece with me, and my car doesn't start. And so I had to leave that car there. So it's 2 hours away now, and I don't know what's wrong with it yet. They'll tell me. But this is like the gut reaction is to be like, okay, so what do I need to do financially to like make this happen? Mm-hmm. And it's times like this where it could be really easy to be like, well, I'm going to hold on, like I'm going to close my grip on like my finances and not be generous because I don't know what's going to happen. But like part of like following Jesus and being obedient to that part of my life is like, hey, no, like this circumstances they're different, but we're still called to be open-handed and generous with our finances. And so that's what it looks like for me, even like today, to take a step of faith is to not feel the pressure to like close things up just to make sure that James can do everything he can do, but trust that God is going to work things out and I can continue to be generous. Yep. So that's one way that I think that as I was listening yesterday, I was like, yeah, I think that's pretty obvious the way that I'm being called to be courageous in like even just this weekend, like in a situation that came up 2 days ago. Yeah,
man, absolutely. I think everybody, I was talking to a father a couple of weeks ago who was really struggling with the age of his kids and they're growing to this age of disobedience is more so the norm. And like, what does it mean to take a next step of faith there? And so challenging him, what does it look like to, are you leading your family spiritually? What does that mean? Am I willing to say a prayer at the meal table, or am I willing to sit down with my kid or go for a walk and just have a conversation about, hey, what's really going on? What's going on in your heart and mind, and what do you feel like God is leading you to? And creating those conversations with your kids instead of just being frustrated that they're not obeying the word you're speaking. Like a step of faith is to go deeper and to be more intentional with what it may look like. And so I think there are endless expressions of what that might mean for people who are listening today. Like, where is God maybe putting us in places of risk or places of challenge? Kind of like Joshua's at the edge going, this just seems like too much. Aging parents, failing health of parents for some. For others, it's on the other end of the spectrum of maybe trying to get pregnant or having a baby for the first time or trying to adjust to family life with a spouse that's TDY right now. You know, all those, literally every example I just mentioned were conversations I had after church yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've even as you're talking about them, I know multiple people in our church family, just in our community, that are in one of those stages of life.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's pretty interesting that they come. But when you talked a little bit yesterday, sorry, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
No,
I was going to say, we talked about this progression of going from fear to negativity to disobedience.
Yeah.
And that is the opposite of like being courageous.
Yeah.
And how any of those situations that you just kind of brought up can lead us into fear and can lead us into this negativity and disobedience. And fear can be kind of paralyzing when it comes to our faith. Yeah. So how would you say that we kind of, how in the Bible have you seen that play out of just the fear into negativity into disobedience? Have you seen that play out in the story? Oh,
well, you see it in the nation of Israel's history, like before this moment. You can go all the way back to the book of Genesis and you start following through, like God said, do things one way. And then you see Adam and Eve, right? Yeah. And then they're trying to get on a right path. And then their kids, Cain kills Abel, right? And then you fast forward as the nation, as the population grows, then the nations are formed, and God says, hey, these are my people. But then there's this continual cycle of, oh, hey, God, we trust in you. We love you. God blesses them. They grow comfortable in their blessing. And then they start to forget who God is. And then they grow towards disobedience. And then there's consequence because of that. Yep. And then it leads them right back. So the entire Old Testament is almost that same cycle over and over and over again.
It's kind of the story just on replay.
Oh, yeah. Story on replay. And maybe even in our own lives. You know, we see that too, where like, man, when it just seems like we get things right with God, maybe we start getting really comfortable. We forgot what got us there, or the habits, the spiritual habits we formed, our prayer life, reading the word. And all of a sudden we're in a good season. We're like, okay, I'm good now, right? And then all of a sudden we start doing things our own way. We forget who the Lord is, you know, in our daily life. And we may go to church even, but it doesn't mean that we're following on a daily basis. And so what does that look like? And so I think that's where I see that in Scripture. And then you know, conversely, you know, man, what does it look like to turn that sequence around differently? So like I shared yesterday, I think it's either fear or courage is going to drive us in our life. It's fear or courage. Which one is it going to be? We know where fear ultimately leads, you know.
Yeah. And so Exodus is my favorite book of the Bible, because I think seeing the cycle that the Israelites kind of find themselves in the whole time, it's easy for us to look at and be like, man, what a bunch of idiots. You know, how do they not figure it out eventually? But when it comes down to it, like this is the story of people. This is the story of us, of you and myself, and our tendencies to be able to like get into this cycle of not being courageous and to live this life of fear where we hold on really tightly to the things and we don't allow the Spirit to intervene, and we just like I need to do this all by myself. And that's the story of the Bible, and that's the hope that we find later in the story through Jesus. But later, we talked about how courage can lead the way. And instead of going from fear to negativity to disobedience, we talked a little bit how you can go from courage to obedience to blessing. Yeah. And so can you share with us a little more about what you're getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just exactly like the pattern that kind of, as we walked through that passage yesterday, he's like, be strong and courageous. And then he goes right into obey the book of the law that Moses, my servant, gave you. It's like obey, meditate on it day and night. Yeah. And so the courage wasn't, hey, you know, Joshua, get ready for battle. I need you to do some more push-ups and get the colonels around, or whoever they were called at the time, you know, and like, hey, let's get ready. We got to go and we got to do this, and let's build the courage seemed to be directly related to be obedient to what I've said. Yeah. You know, and so, and then it clearly says, and then you will be prosperous and successful. So he's like, be strong and courageous, obey my word, then you will be prosperous and successful. Yeah. And it's really that simple.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to the thing of kind of like God's plan for people. God's plan for us is to be able to be in right relationship with God and right relationship with others. And so when we are obedient, that's the tool, that's the playbook for how to have right relationships with God and other people. It's not supposed to be, I don't know where it is in the Bible. It talks about how God is not a God of confusion. Right. We're not, and that's the culture that people lived in as worshiping all these other gods, is you never knew like what the litmus test is to see if a God's mad at you. You're just hoping things go out well, and that's how you live your life. And God is so vastly different from any other God that existed in the culture, because he's talking about, no, this is the plan. This is how you prosper. God is very direct and is not trying to be confusing at all, but it does go against our nature to want to, right? Like when your car breaks down, you want to like tense up and figure out like,
and say the wrong words.
All right, what do I need to do to make this happen? And my first instinct is not always, God, how are you going to intervene? Like, how am I going to trust that God is still for me in this moment? And no matter what circumstance that may look like in your life, but how is God still for me? And I think that's the decision. It's in those moments that we get to decide if we're going to be fearful and take things into our own hands, or we're going to be courageous and partner with God, is how God tries to restore this situation.
Yep. Man,
and so you kind of gave us this challenge towards the end. You said, what's one area in your life where God is calling you to have courage?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's, and this has been a pretty real journey for me, as always. Like every season of my life, there are current things that are just what seem to be immense challenges, whether they be personally, within my family life, within my professional life, sometimes external things that you just continually find yourself put in these situations. And I think it's easy to say, God, I don't want to be put through the fire again. God, I don't want to go through this difficulty or this challenge. I once had a mentor years and years ago, about 15 years ago. He said, I'll never forget him saying, Scott, you will always be one of three places in your life. You'll either be heading into a crisis, in the middle of a crisis, or recovering from a crisis. And he said, you're never going to be anywhere else. And at the time, I thought he sounded like kind of a jaded older guy.
Yeah.
And then,
like, that sounds very pessimistic.
It sounds very pessimistic. And then as I've aged, I've just realized he's been right, and it might be, again, one of those different buckets of my life. It may be just me. It may be something within family. It may be something within circles of friends or within my profession. And there's constantly something out there, but faith is being certain, right, of what we hope for and what we cannot see. And when I live a life by faith, when the Word of God says live by faith, we live by faith, not by sight. If I live by sight, I'm going to be continually frustrated with something or somebody or myself. If I live by faith, I'm going to constantly have this mindset of, God, I'm going to be with you today. I'm going to walk with you today. Whatever you have for me, God, I'm going to say this is a part of what you have for me. And knowing that, as we landed in this passage, it was this idea of, and knowing that I will be with you always. Yeah. I will be with you always, no matter what it is. And so if I live by faith, I receive these challenges, these seasons of fire, if you will, these moments of standing on the cusp of something that just seems like way too much to handle. But if I live by faith, I say, God, okay, this is part of your plan. And as the book of James says, in the testing of my faith will develop perseverance so that I can become mature and complete, not lacking anything. And so if I'm going to live by faith, I'm going to continually say, God, whatever you have for me, I'm going to walk with you. I'm just having this random moment here, James. I'm going to get my phone out.
Yeah, go for it.
Because this morning I saved I was on Twitter earlier today and came across a quote that I just thought, man, that is, there's an author, Lee Strobel, you've probably heard of, written a lot of great books over the years. But he just put a little prayer on Twitter today, and he said, thank you for today, Lord. It's one day closer to heaven with you, one more day to share your love in the world. So help me to maximize this day for your glory. And it was just like this simple prayer, and I just about scrolled past it. I went back. I was like, what did Lee Strobel say? It's one day closer to heaven with you. And for whatever reason, that line just resonated with me, just like, isn't that the reality? Like for all of us, if we're living by faith, it's like heaven is the ultimate goal, and today is an opportunity to grow in that. So that involves receiving the risk and the challenges that God puts in my life and knowing that he's calling me in the midst of it to be strong and courageous. Why? Because he's with me.
That's good. So we're going to be in this series kind of talking about being strong and courageous for the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And so where are we kind of headed as we kind of continue to spend time in the book of Joshua?
Yeah, the book of Joshua is incredible. I'd encourage everybody to read through it this month. And literally, we're just going to follow Joshua's journey. So this next week, we're going to kind of get into the river story, because they're standing at the edge. They're going to cross the river. And then we begin to see this journey playing out of them taking land, but encountering challenges from God and others along the way. And in the midst of it, what does it look like to be strong and courageous?
Well, so everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited. This has been, I thought this past week was a great, just a great sermon, and just kind of really encouraging to myself, and also just kind of the realistic. This is kind of what our life is like. This is, everyone goes through these seasons, and so we're going to be talking about continually how to be strong and courageous. And it sounds like one of those things. It's really easy to say, it's hard to do, and so we're going to continue to unpack that in the next couple of weeks. So thank you everyone for being here with us. We look forward to seeing you next week.